Hello everybody and welcome to this evening's episode of Mapping It Out, the live show that takes you behind the creation of that piece of software that we all are desperately waiting for, the DEIOS software. Now, of course, I have Till waiting to answer all of your questions and to take us through the latest update on just where we are in terms of creating this monstrous magical device. And every month seems to bring us new toys to play with. That's exactly what happened this past month. Patch 0.3 came out with some nice additional bits and bobs. If you haven't yet played with it, I suggest you have a look. We will also be using it later on this evening, where I get to play around and Till gets to walk us through all of the different options and functions, and we get to discuss some of the reasons why they chose to do what they did for certain tools. We also get some bits and pieces to see what's coming up in the future with regards to that software. We're looking at the roadmap moving forward into November and December and the end of the year, which has arrived so very, very, very quickly, I have to say. And we're also launching a new thing, which I think is quite fun, or at least I hope you all will think it's fun as well. So I like your comments on that when we get to it, which is not just yet. Now, please remember to hit that like button or the subscribe button just to show the DungeonFog team that you care and that you want them to carry on doing these updates. It's always helpful to know that you like what we do. And that's something that you can do for us right now. Something else that you can do for us during the show is when you have your questions, and I hope you do have some questions, please type the word question in caps in front of your questions so that I can see it, and then I will do my very best to ask it to our guest and get them to answer. So let's get on with it. We've got all kinds of things coming up. So here we go. Till, welcome to the show. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Hello, thank you for having me as always, and thank you Guy for being here. And hello everyone, thank you for watching and hopefully asking a few questions.
There we go. Patch 0.3 has arrived, and it's got a lot of fun things Till that are in there, as well as some sneak peek features of things coming up in the distant future. Now, before we jump into exactly what's in that patch, I wanted to ask you, how do you feel on the day that you guys release a new patch? Are you nervous?
Yes, we are nervous every time. So whenever we sorry, I'm kind of off screen a little bit. Let me move over here. Okay.
Get in here.
Okay. Yes, we're terribly nervous, of course, because although, at least for DEIOS, we have this build pipeline that kind of proves whether or not the build functions or not, it is still, when we release it, it's a call to the whole team to see if the self-updater is updating, if everything is working. We always have to pay attention that whatever we do works on Windows, Mac, and Linux. So we all need to test that on various bases, because it quite often, no, it would be wrong to say quite often, but there is always the fear that whatever you have tested as a pre-release, for some magic reason breaks when you flag it as a release. And so whenever we release something, everyone's suddenly getting very hectic and is trying to test everything once more once the patch is out. Luckily, we didn't have any major hiccups since we've switched to the new alpha build, and everything that went out was kind of where we expected it. And that's why we're doing an alpha, of course, is then the next day is a hard day because you wake up and you press on refresh on your feedback tool, and you're in that state where you're like, oh, please let it just be a few bug reports or just a few feedback messages. And when it starts to go and fill up, then you know that you've broken something.
Okay, well, here's hoping that in the future it doesn't fill up rapidly.
Yeah.
Till, what did the new patch, when we talk about crashes and that sort of thing, What did it fix, or try to fix, or...
Okay, so 0.3.3 in particular was fixing a lot of things that were unsatisfying with the text tool in the first release, because I think it was 0.3.2 or 0.3.1 where we released the text tool that allows you to add labels to your map. And with the feedback we got in and the additional testing we had, we realized that there is still something that we need to improve. So this, I think the core concentration was on the text tool, and we are still working and still improving on the color palette, because we know that this is such a crucial tool for people to work with. So 0.3.3 was mainly about the text tool, and then, as always, kind of sneakily laying groundways for things that are coming out. So I know that you have seen, and you referenced it in your great introduction speech, that we had this little checkbox introduced that says outlines only. And that was a very experimental feature that we added mainly to see if it works, if our mapping tools work, the way we build the sprite sheets, but also to kind of get a first understanding of how, honestly, how useless the tool is as it is right now, and where improvements are needed.
Yeah, well, okay, yes, I hear what you're saying there. You kind of almost don't know what to anticipate until it's there. And then you go, oh, that's a surprise, or yeah. Yes, we expected that. And
if you, like, probably a difference between what you would maybe expect from a bigger company and from us is, if you're doing something like that, you have internal testing and you instantly realize, wait, that needs to be fixed. Some things need to be changed. So as a big company, you would probably say, okay, hold back, do not release. We're not handing this out. But because we're so closely working with the community, with you people, there are often decisions internally where I say, I know it's useless as it is right now, but I'm pretty sure that there are creative people out there who can still make use of it as it is, and they would like to see it earlier than later. So why not hand it out and improve it later? And the outlines only feature is apparently one of those things that you could hold back until it's completely finished, or you could hand out, and some people might like it and they're exactly waiting for something like that, although we know that it needs improvements.
Makes absolute sense. Till, we're going to be looking at the patch in more detail later on, where I'm actually going to be using it, and you're going to be talking us through all of those features and things. So stick around for that. I think that's going to be very interesting as we sort of say, well, why do you do it that way, or why do you do it this way? Very, very insightful opportunity coming up. Now, before we go there, though, I know that we have a roadmap for moving forward. Yes. Shall we discuss that quickly?
Sure, of course. Let's jump in.
So here it is, the current roadmap.
Yes, and what you can see is, because we are, as we are streaming tonight, we're in between the next big patch that is coming up. And you can see that there is a lot of stuff that we're currently working on and finishing up. So one of the core things, and I think we're going to discuss why this takes so long, the undo redo for brushes is finally being finished, and we expect that to be, so we definitely know that it is going to be finished with the next patch that we want to release. Same goes for thumbnail rendering. For those of you who have no idea what that means, that is when you are on the map dashboard of DEIOS, you're currently not seeing the maps as little thumbnails, as little preview images. So that is being added now. In terms of tools, we want to release the next patch with the blueprints tool implemented. The biomes tool is still not ready and is still being worked on, so this is not going to be released in the next patch. regarding UI, we're going to see a first little implementation today of the color pipette that is already finished. We're going to release the artist color palette, which is, I think, quite useful and really cool. The prop picker will be released with search. It already has a search field, but showing the tags that are associated to props and searching by tags and grouping by tags. That will be available in the next release. Finally, the scale will come back, which is necessary because we want to have new menus and settings where you can adjust grid size, grid color, grid opacity, and scale units. So all of that is being produced at the moment. And I do feel that we are, so early November to mid-November, we will be ready to release that new patch. And from then on, the next big thing that we are going to work on is export, because our export is terrible at the moment, and we know that, so that needs to be fixed. And some other things that we might tackle today.
Cool. So overall, would you say that you guys are kind of on track?
Yeah, I would say we are on track with where we want to be, although we are now experiencing that kind of, we are in the last stretch for what we want to do. And now it's like stress is coming back. We're like, oh my God, so many things need to be finished before we can do city building. How can we tackle all of that? How long will it take? And our internal goal is to be finished with world map editing within the next 6 months. So we can then start city map making. And you know, whenever you get that deadline, when it suddenly kind of creeps into your attention field, you feel the stress. You're like, oh, but there's so much left to do. But I do think that we're on track and that we can achieve what we wanted to achieve in that time frame. So yeah, knock on wood.
Fantastic. Now, blueprints are something that we've been talking about for quite a while now. And before we kind of jump into blueprints, is it going to have the same restrictions that you currently have in the DungeonFog battle map editor, where you can bring in your blueprints, but you can't actually export them?
Okay, so no, it's not having the same restrictions. It is up to you to decide whether or not you want to export them or not. However, we do still differ between the core functionality of a blueprint and something that we're calling a map canvas. Just to explain that, a blueprint is something that you want as a reference that you can probably trace somehow to create your own landmasses and your own design in DEIOS directly. So a blueprint is something that you use just as a reference to your creation, whereas a map canvas is an existing map that you use where you want to add stuff through DEIOS. So you're basically creating a background image and you're adding stuff to that. And what we are introducing right now, or what we're going to introduce with the next patch, is the blueprint tool. We're not paying attention to the map canvas at the moment, because you can kind of achieve the same thing with the blueprints tool already. But you can do different things, or you should be able to do different things with the blueprint tool or the map canvas.
Okay, well, let's talk about blueprints.
Yeah,
you've got a slide ready for us, a slide presentation.
Yes, unfortunately, the blueprints tool is not in a presentable way that I can show as a prototype. So what I brought today was the design mockups that Bodhi did for the dev team that explains how the blueprints tool are intended to work. And you will then see, oh, interesting.
Wrong one. My bad. That's on me.
Okay, round two.
Sorry, you were talking about blueprints.
Yes. When we release that, the blueprints tool should be ready and hopefully as close as possible to what you're going to see here in terms of how the design is intended and then how the outcome will be.
Perfect. Is that
Okay.
right?
Yes, we're starting with that screen, and here you're going to see that we are introducing, which is helpful for the blueprints, but we are going to be using this a lot. We're going to introduce a main menu. And we're going to populate the main menu quite a lot over the next couple of months, because a lot of stuff can be put into the main menu here. And one of the things is that you can use the main menu to add a blueprint to your existing map. So we can, in probably the next mapping it out, we can then talk about all the things that are contained in the main menu or should be contained there eventually. But right now, this is just a good way to show you that something like that is coming, and that you can then go to your view option and select add blueprint. And when you do that, you are then opening the blueprint window where you can manage your blueprints. So basically, I think that's the next slide. This is where you go. So you get an internal library that stores all the blueprints that you need, and you can reference them wherever you like. So you can pick a blueprint, you can delete blueprints from there, and you can import blueprints here. And once you select the specific blueprint, you can then place it, which would be the next slide. You can place it onto your canvas, and from that point on, it mostly behaves like a prop with different settings. Or that's not true, because props are, well, to be simple, forget that I said that. It's not behaving like a prop, but you can select it, move it around, rotate it, do stuff with it. And of course, you can scale it and adjust it. And you can adjust opacity to it. So that's the idea behind a blueprint. You position it where you like it. You adjust all the settings that you need, adjust the transparency, and then it sits there until you toggle the visibility on and off. And you can draw while the blueprint is kind of a top layer, allowing you to see through what you're doing beneath the blueprint. The good thing about that is, because you can manage several different blueprints, is you can start to add different blueprints to different sections of your world and then start tracing them. So if you like Scotland as a good reference for an island, you could take a screenshot of, I don't know, Google Maps Scotland, place it there, trace that, and then take Australia as a second continent, place it somewhere, and then trace the outlines of that. So having multiple blueprints on your map is possible and should allow you to kind of probably as a pre-stage to your real map making. You could use this as a kind of a mood board where you take all the locations and the landmasses that you would like to have as a reference to your own world, position it where you like it, and then start tracing them.
That's fantastic. That's really
when
fantastic.
we're talking about tracing, there is a feature that is not going to be in the current blueprint release, but is planned for blueprints later. So first we're going to identify how the blueprint system works and if everyone likes it. But if you go to the next screen, there is something that we call image tracing that we want to introduce, which means that we can take an image that you import and try to identify by creating basically a binary color map. We can try to identify the coastlines and trace them for you automatically. So you don't have to manually trace Scotland or here the Moonshae Isles, but you just press a button and you have a threshold that kind of tries to find the optimum. And then you press trace and it will automatically trace that and convert it into a landmass for you.
I cannot tell you how exciting that is for me.
Yes.
I have a map which I made 20 years ago, and every single piece of map making software, you bring it in and you spend days just quietly tracing the coastline, which you have drawn 20 times before. That's brilliant. That's absolutely fantastic. I think that's really, really, really cool.
Yeah, it is also quite complicated because if you like, we ran a few tests on how maps are out there, and the problem is that having a good tracing algorithm needs very precise contrast between black and white. And a lot of those maps, they don't, because they are complex and they're colored, they don't have a good contrast. So this requires a lot of fine tuning from our side, and probably something where you need to kind of pre-process the image before we can really read it. But yeah, I think it is going to be a very useful feature. Absolutely. And it is definitely finding its way in there, because I would like to have that myself a lot.
Yeah, and even if it doesn't do it perfectly, I would rather be going in and repairing and just changing the contour than having to do the whole thing from scratch.
Yes, exactly.
Next slide.
I think we're done with the blueprints. So next slide is going to be another tool, right?
Aha. Okay. So blueprints. Just before we go there, I'm just going to go. This is the first time I've used this software. So this slide presentation. So I'm just going to go back because there are a few questions that came through. And the one question Damien the DM asked: does this mean we will be getting expanded canvas sizes now?
Most likely, yes. So because that has to do with the settings. First of all, right now we have a fixed canvas size, and it is quite easy for us to reintegrate different canvas sizes. Adjusting the canvas size of an existing map on the fly will be part of the settings that we slowly are going to establish more and more. More importantly, it means that we need to bring back scale, because whatever you do here, it doesn't really make sense if you don't have a scale reference. So right now, DEIOS doesn't offer a scale because we got rid of that because we said we wanted to rework the way that scaling works. But to make blueprints fully functional for someone who really wants to make maps, you need scale, because otherwise you can't put, as you can see in the image that I produced here, you can't really put the Moonshade Isles with that snippet of the Forgotten Realms or Sword Coast into relation, and you need to have a scale to really do that.
Absolutely. All right, on to colors. So what was the whole color palette, extended palette? You're still working on that. What does it involve?
Okay. Talking with Kiora, getting your feedback, and working with the brushes, what we had in there, it would be wrong to say realized, but it emphasized how important color management is in a software where you're drawing maps. We always knew that color is important, but we've probably kind of re-evaluated how important this tool really is to be at its full capacity. So we sat down and we said, okay, the initial color picker is nice. If you remember, the initial one was basically one tilted slider where you can pick colors and that's it. And we said, okay, this is most likely going to be one of the core tools that people will use, because assets are assets. You can place them, you can colorize them probably, and that's it. But the way that it blends with the surrounding is something that you do with brushes, for example, and of course the colorized features of props itself. So we went back and we said, okay, this needs to be a very powerful and user-friendly tool. And we identified basically three core columns to what the color picker should do. So A, of course, it needs to give you the option to define your own colors. But you are not going to do that on a regular basis. Like, not every color that you use, you want to define again and again and again, which leads to the conclusion that you want to create your own custom palette of colors, which then basically led to the conclusion that we said, well, there are a lot of people out there who are not, like me, for example, who are not really good with colors. And they're like, I don't want to build my own palette. Can I please have someone else's palette, please? Which was a great way to go and talk with Kiora and say, hey, you're doing all the assets for the initial build now. Wouldn't it be great if you could provide us with a base color palette that is in perfect fit to all the assets out there? And Kiora was very happy with that and started to do that, which kind of led to the next decision, which was like, well, if Kiora can do that, how can we make it possible that every artist who's submitting assets can also submit his preferred color palette for the assets? So we started to investigate technologies that allow us to do that. And all in all, if you go to the next slide, we came up with this beast of a color picker where you have you have in the upper corner, you have the textures and the colors and the templates, I think it says, or I can't read it.
Favorites.
Favorites, exactly. Then you have your own picker where you can define colors, which you then can add to your own palettes, or you can browse palettes that are coming from the artist, which means that when you pick colors, all you need to do is you open the color picker, you decide, it is a decision from you as a user if you want to pick your own color, browse your own palette or create a new palette, or lastly, if you want to just use the color palettes from the artist, or if you want to modify the color palettes from the artist to your own needs. And all of that should be possible, and all of that will be possible with the next patch. I think the only thing that we might not make it into the next patch is building your own palette from colors. So we already have the color palette from Kiora, and it's already being implemented. So the artist palette will be there. Building your own palette might be added later. For now, we have that recently used thing that shows you the latest colors you have used, which is a kind of a in-between way to your own color palette. And then, of course, there is the pipette, which allows you to pick up colors that are already used on the map. So that is another one that I think is quite important. And that one we have as a preview for today.
That's right. That's right. Are there any more slides for us to talk about, Till?
I honestly don't know. If you go down, that's it. Oh yeah, there you go. So in terms of importing palettes, right now it is hard coded. So Kiora's palette is hard coded into the system, but we are already using the ACO files that are usually used for color palettes in GIMP or Photoshop or Affinity, which means that importing color palettes will be possible as Fantastic. A file, as an ACO file. Yeah.
Lovely. Okay. Well, I think that's very, very exciting. And you say that at least these will be in the next patch.
The colors you're seeing there will be in the next patch, because that is the first color palette that Kiora created for us, which is for the base fantasy pack.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Till, something else that you mentioned that was going to be worked on, you kind of went through it a little bit, was the map settings.
Yes.
Talk to us a little bit more about that. What else? What specifically do you mean when you say map settings?
Okay. We are identifying more and more. I mean, we knew that that some kind of settings should be there, and you should have a menu item that says modify settings. And now we're slowly getting to the point where we can identify and understand what we want to have in there. Because the map settings should be like preferences on a map basis. And then there are preferences that are kind of on a system basis. For example, the language is something that could be a global setting that you adjust where you say, I want this in my personal language. Whereas map settings, this is the grid style. Is it a hex grid or is it a rectangular grid, a square grid? The measurement, the scaling, so at what distances should be a grid created and what is one square, let's stick with squares for now, what does that equal in scaling size? That is something that you want to modify. How visible is the grid? What color does it have? How transparent is the grid? Again, that is something that you would like to have. Possibly, where do we draw the grid? Just on the sea level or above everything? What else are in settings? I can't remember right now. I know that there are a few other things that we identified that we would like to put into settings. But generally, we just talked about it, the map size itself.
Yes.
What are the dimensions of that map? That should be modifiable in the settings.
Adjustable, yeah.
Adjustable, thank you. So generally speaking, there are a lot of things that have a good place if we put them in one spot, and that should be the general settings of the map. So we are now starting to establish them. And not all of them will be there at the first release, but
sure.
we then have a place that we can populate with more and more settings. And I'm pretty sure that the community will come to us and say, I would like to adjust this or that in my settings as well, which will allow us to always differentiate between what is a tool setting and what is a general map setting.
Another question from Damien the DM. Will we be able to import palettes from Photoshop or Affinity? Is that the plan? Is that we would be able to
Yes, that is an ACO file. So whatever you do in Photoshop or Affinity, there is an option. That's what Keora did. He created the palette in Photoshop, and then he exported the palette as an ACO file, and we just took that. So this means that you can use any graphics program that is capable of producing an ACO file. There are even ACO builders online. So you could, you could start to create your own Xcode library online and convert that into an ACO file. But long story short, yes, export from Photoshop, import into DEIOS.
Fantastic. Now, I promised you a little bit earlier on that there was going to be something fun, or at least I think it's fun. It might not be fun for you though, still. I was sitting here thinking about all the things that go on to DEIOS, and the arguably the downside is the bugs that crop up from time to time. So my last question for you today, before we move on to more in-depth look into DEIOS, is what is your favorite bug of the month, Till? Do you have a favorite bug?
Oh my God, that's a mean question. Favorite bug of the month. So for this current build, yes, I have one, and it is kind of the reason why the outline thingy is so useless, and that is. We knew it. I mean, we knew it from the start. If you're just rendering the outlines and you're not masking what's behind that, it creates a terrible mess of lines on your map. And it doesn't really qualify as a bug, but when you go and you have all your maps and you open them and you tick the box for just show outlines, the result is really weird. And I kind of had fun looking at that, but I also was like, oh God, maybe we should, where do we put that on the timeline that it works perfectly, that it's masking? So that if I have to name something, then that would be it.
Okay. The chat is just going, Ben Nicholson says their favorite bug is the one with 7 legs. I'm like, well, okay, sure. And then Forecaster71 says, Till, are you a member of the Bug of the Month Club?
Sorry, is that something like the High Miles Club thing? Just with bugs?
Just with
I don't
bugs.
know. I'm scared now. I don't really want to be. The only good bug is a dead bug, so maybe I'm more like.
There we go. All right. Yeah. So bugs are a thing. I found a bug which I was told was actually a feature.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah, but we're not going to go into that. All right. So what we're going to do now is something a little bit different, hopefully, something that will help you to understand what's going on more in terms of DEIOS and that sort of thing. And that is to show you a map and to work with a map that I have open here, and to kind of walk you through all of the different features and functions and why they are how they are. So please, if you have any questions or thoughts or comments, now is the time really to get in there and share them with us. Just before we go there, one last question from Damien is if the world map stuff is finished in about 6 months, does that mean city mapping is now being looked at Q2, Q3 of next year?
Yes.
Okay. There we go. All right. So there is the answer to your question. Right. So here we are. This is the DEIOS interface, and Till, this is the patch plus a little bit extra. Is that correct?
How do you mean? What?
Because
what?
this has the color picker in it, right?
Oh yeah, you're looking at the version that I shared with you, which is an internal build version with the color picker in there.
Yes.
And here you can see the image that is not showing the preview thumbnail of the map that you've created. And this is something that we're going to address with the next patch, so that you can always see the map that you're working on as a preview here.
Yes. Now, this map here, we're going to start with this map because I think it demonstrates quite a few things. I started to create this map. I needed a map of a mountain range called the Thousand Spire Mountains for one of my games, and I had started to create it. Now, I did not finish this. I raised my hand and I said I did not finish this because I specifically wanted to do it in black and white using the new outlines feature, which is found up here, which unfortunately, because of the overlay, you actually cannot see. So I'm going to get rid of this
hidden
overlay.
Feature. Oh,
it's a hidden feature. Well, there you go. Now you can see the outlines up here. If I click on it, it removes all of the color. Now, of course, that is exactly how these mountains, well, how every prop is meant to work. Is that correct? Because it's multiple layers. It's not just a single
really
prop.
cool. What is really cool about that is that every prop that we have is actually consistent of, and that is something that Kiara is currently working on because we're changing that. One of the things the outcome of that test was that Kiara said, oh, I need to rework my assets to some extent. Is every asset consists of a line art, which is the outline layer, and a color layer. So what Kiara is currently doing is he's even splitting it more, and he's calling it the line art layer, the highlight layer, and the color layer. So every asset is created with 3 different layers that you can manage, which means that you could then go and pick specific assets and say, I want to draw them just with the outlines, or just with the outlines and the highlight, or I don't know why you would do that, but for example, just the color. And absolutely,
yeah.
That's what every prop is already, it's implemented like that. That was from the scratch, it was in there, but we didn't give an option to manipulate that. Sorry, my dog is dreaming. very, very heavily and doing squeaky noises. I'm not sure if you hear it.
So you were talking earlier about the outlines having a problem.
Yes,
and
well,
this is the
there you
example
go. This is the
thereof.
example. Because having just the outlines is only useful when you assign each prop the right space without having props being overlapping. So what we need to do is, before that really becomes a useful feature, is we need to identify the color layer as a masking for everything that is behind it. Which means we're drawing the outline, but everything that is hidden behind the asset is masked. And then it works, because then you just have the outlines and the color brushes.
Absolutely.
So when you scroll down to your southeast, then there you did that. There you played, sorry, southwest, my bad. There, everything was, you've placed it, I think, on purpose to have the distance between everything. And it looks quite fantastic. And if you start to colorize it now with brushes, it will look amazing. But the second they are overlapping, it doesn't work anymore.
Correct.
Yeah.
And when I was putting these down, I did have to make sure, like even here you can see there's an overlap of a ridge.
Yeah.
And you kind of want it to be hidden. And you want those lines to terminate behind each other. So that's absolutely fine. Is there a timeline for when you're thinking that might come into effect? Is that it's obviously not a priority. This was never really meant to be a major thing at the moment.
I don't know when. I know in what work package it is. It is in the work package where you can colorize assets. I don't know when we can tackle this, because if I look at what we want to finish by the end, like by the end of this year, there is a kind of, this is high priority that we want to have tackled by the end of the year. And then we basically have 3 months to bring in all the additional features. It doesn't mean that we stop working on world map editing while we establish city map editing. It just means that we shift focus. And I do think that this is coming in the first quarter next year, but I can't really tell you when, or maybe we shift priorities. So all I can say, it is coming. I don't know really when.
Absolutely. Another question that's just come up, and I think it's a good question, is with the difference of the prop layers, will we be able to affect the change on each of those layers eventually?
You mean on a single prop basis?
Correct.
Yes. So that is something because there should be a global option. I think there should be a global option where you say this affects all props at the same time. But it should also be on a single prop basis. Or like, so what we've been thinking is, if you picture the workflow, you have 3 points where you need to do that. The one is on a global level, where you just take your map and say, oh, I now want a black and white or just an old style version without color.
Right.
So reduce everything. So on a global level, you want to do that. The second thing is you want to do that while you create. So on a tool basis, where you say, I'm brushing props now, but all the props I'm placing down, they should behave like that. That would be the second kind of level where you want to go in. And the last level is that you want to select specific props or a specific prop group and turn it on or off on a single prop or prop selection basis. So on those 3 levels, we need to tap into the software and say, there should be a switch, and there you should be able to adjust it.
To sort of do something. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, when it comes to looking at the color choices here, as you say, we've already started to get this recently used, which is to a degree a palette in its own right, because we can go back and reference these colors. Something that I wanted to ask as a personal favor.
Yes.
I'm left-handed by nature. But as you can see, here is my left hand. I was trained to use a mouse with my right hand, which is not my strong hand. And I noticed when I was coloring this map before, my finger gets really tired holding down the left mouse button. Can we just make like a shortcut key that I can hold on the keyboard and it just applies color so I don't have to use my mouse finger? Because it's so therapeutic. I find it so fun to just sit here and just blend colors, and you kind of go, okay, that's dark because I want it to be in the depth area. And then you come up and you lighten it up a little bit. It's a bit too much color there. But yes, anyway, sorry, that was just me being me, going, my finger's sore. Stop making your map and go and do something else, right?
And also, it's like, that's why we have a feedback and wish list where you can add and wish for such things, and we will make sure that we will find a place to put that in. I could recommend you a drawing tablet. That would make life much easier. So another thing that Keora is also working on is, because of the way we're seeing it right now, the way that mountains at the base blend. That isn't working quite as we want it. So with this different shading options that Keora is working on, we hopefully can tackle that this looks more natural when the mountains blend into your scenery.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And I think also having that highlight layer separated means that I can determine the basic color of these mountains and say, well, actually these mountains, I understand the purple hue to kind of give the sense of atmosphere that mountain ranges often have, but I actually want my mountains to have green shadows rather than purple shadows. That would be then the colorize that allows you to colorize each specific layer, which is, from a UI perspective, quite complicated, because you suddenly have different layers where you select the prop, and then you have 3 different colorize options because you can colorize all the 3 layers. But I've seen some of the concepts that Bodhi did for that, and they work quite nicely. So it's more like the concept is done on that. Now it just needs to be programmed and sort of brought into play. All right, Till, take us through some of the design thinking or the ideology behind some of the designs. So when we look at the color picker or the pipette, there was some debate as to how you were going to do that. Do you choose the blended color? What was the final decision, at least in this version?
Well, the final decision in this version was purely time-based. And we said, okay, for now, it is picking the screen color. There is going to be, and it's on the list of things that we want to do, an option where you can decide whether or not you want to pick the color that is on screen versus the color that was originally used without transparency being added. But we decided that the on-screen color is probably more useful because it allows you a better gradients blending, whereas with all the color palettes that people are creating, they have a reference of the original color anyways. So what is missing at the moment, I think, if you're going to experience that, is, I think, while in the coloring tool, you would really like to have a shortcut, like, I don't know, pressing the Alt key to bring up the pipette automatically.
Yes.
Because then you could, without leaving your workspace, you could switch between colors and very quickly start to create those blends. And that is, it wasn't finished for this build right now, but it is on the list for the patch. So there is going to be a shortcut where you can access your pipette.
Yes. Already, though, I mean, I think we can see that being able to choose the colors that are already on the map, I'm not having to eyeball it and kind of going, well, I think it's more of this or more of that. If you've been watching how I've been doing it so far, you'll notice that originally I was kind of going, well, it's a sort of this color or it's a that color. So definitely I can see that as really being useful. Like just the Alt key, I think, is the shortcut for Photoshop. To automatically bring up its pipette. I have found a bug
Oh, great.
While the picker is on, he said, you can't scroll around the map with right click.
Oh, nice.
Surprise!
Surprise. Also, the picker is not very precise in terms of the way that we're picturing, or we're showing you the picker icon next to the mouse.
Right.
Needs improvement. Right now, you get the little picker icon, the pipette icon, and then you have the mouse cursor. But what you really want is a crossbar and a picker that really tells you this is the pixel color that I want to pick. So yeah, this is going to be improved. Thank you very much for your bug report, though. And
every little bit helps.
I will let the devs know.
Yeah, just don't tell them it was from me. All right, so there's another question here. Will that discrete color selection, the future of the color picker, always pick the top layer without transparency or the bottom layer?
It will. That's a really good question. To be honest, we always assumed that it picks the top layer. Or in other words, that it picks the top layer color from the map layer that you're on. Like, if you remember, we had a layer system back then that we took away to rework it. And I know that next mapping it out, we're going to talk about that, because we're starting to work on that in November. But honestly, that is a great question. Do I want to pick, or how do I pick the color that has the landmass beneath if I want to pick a solid color?
I think another very important thing would be, can I pick the color from the prop? Because at the moment it's doing just the brush, but that's fine.
No. Pick a green.
I thought I had tried that. I could be wrong. So so let's go for this sort of white color.
Careful, you need to. That's the problem with the mouse cursor.
I'll zoom in.
Zoom in, do the picker where your mouse dot sits and not where the pipette sits.
Aha.
This is the point of your mouse cursor.
It is doing that. Absolutely. Yes. Sorry, I completely apologize.
Yes, and that's a problem with how we draw the cursor at the moment. But you can pick any color with the color picker, and it's not taking reference to whether or not it's a prop or a brush or a landmass or the sea and so on and so forth. And the same thing then should apply once we have different biome textures back implemented, where you can just pick up the texture, as we do in DungeonFog, in the battle map editor.
I think already, if you start to look at this, I think we're definitely getting there. If I just turn these outlines off, yeah, it doesn't make much sense because I've been painting around the mountains itself. But
yes, you were.
We are starting to definitely get us.
Well, how about you try to colorize a mountain now with your own colors? Like if you go in somewhere, because now you have the major advantage that it would blend perfectly with the with the stage.
Are you thinking of controlling the feathering around the edge of the brush tool as well at some point?
I think it is. There is an option for that.
Well, there's softness.
Yeah, I think that's
the feathering, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I did not. Let's do it at 100%, just because I want to get some basic color in here. I would really like the shortcut key for the the actual brush size to be changed with key control.
Which, by the way, what you're seeing here right now is I'm not sure if it's going to be in the next patch or one of the after patches. Right now, we have a low resolution for the brushes, which causes this pixelation that you're seeing. But we already know that we can increase the resolution on the deepest brush layer, zoom level, which will then get rid of that. But so that will increase the precision of your brush without the feathering that you're seeing, because that is purely because the texture that you're creating is at a low resolution and thus pixelates.
Right. And also we're really zoomed in as well.
Yes.
So
yeah, but we can, so we've already identified that. We've already looked at that, because I had the same problem. I was trying to do something like that. And I was like, well, but that is really pixelated. And what if I want to draw a 1 pixel line, black line? What if I want to draw my assets fully in DEIOS? And that's not possible, because the resolution for that texture that you're drawing upon is just too low. So Ilya, who was doing that, said, yeah, of course we can increase the resolution for that. It needs a little bit more computation then to draw those things. That's why we stepped away from it for now. But we're going to introduce that as we optimize performance.
Fantastic. Will the application, this is another question, will the application grab color, will the color picker grab color from outside the application? Does it just grab the whatever's on this monitor?
Okay. It is right now, everything in the application is bound inside the application. But we had, and this is just talking between you as viewers and me. This is not on the roadmap yet. This is probably after launch, expanded version of DEIOS. But we did talk about how we can make things like Photoshop does, where you can extend a toolbar outside of the window that the application is in. Like, wouldn't it be amazing if you could extend the prop library to a second monitor and then work from there? To make that happen, there is something like a background script necessary that runs all those separate instances of the software. And the same goes for the pipette. If you want to have a pipette that is working outside of the application, there needs to be a background client running that controls that pipette and what it picks up from the second screen, for example. So not in the near future, but we do have discussed that, and we do know that we want it, not so much because of the pipette, but more because we want to be able to extend your libraries to a second screen.
Makes sense. Fantastic. Till we have nearly got to the end of today's show. And so from our side, what is happening in the next few days with regards to broadcasts and that sort of thing?
So there is not going to be mapping it out stream. Sorry. Welcome to the map stream on this Thursday, because we have autumn holidays here in Austria, and I will be away with my family. So unless someone else, forecaster, wink, wink, finds the time to run a map stream, I will not be able to do one on Thursday. Next week is going to be an exciting one for the DungeonFog users, and eventually for the DEIOS users as well, but its first impact will be on DungeonFog. Somewhere around the mid to end of next week, there will be a little maintenance phase because we will be switching to our new asset management service in the back end, which you will hopefully instantly realize is running, because the time that it takes to load assets will be, I don't know, down to 2 seconds for the whole library. And it will not matter where you are, because we're going into CDN with Amazon service, which means that it is now distributed from the nearest server that you are, from the server that is nearest to you, which will also mean that over the course of the next week and the following, we will launch the marketplace fully with, and I know that some people will be very excited about that, with Patreon integration. Which means that if you are following your beloved artist on Patreon, and this artist has assets in our library, they are available to you without additional purchase options. An artist can declare asset packs available for their Patreon supporters automatically, and Forgotten Adventures is already on board with that. Kiora is on board with that. There are a few other artists that I'm talking to at the moment. So this is over the course of November, this is going to roll out. And yeah, and the whole process is starting next week.
Lovely. Very exciting. Very, very, very exciting. Well, then all that it remains for me to do is to thank all of you for watching all the way through to the end. And yes, thank you, Till, for joining us and sharing all the info that we...
It was a lot of fun, as always. Thank you for having me. Thank you all for your great questions. And yeah, can't wait to see you soon.
All right. Well, then, until next time, I wish you all the happiest of map making.
Thank you.